Thanks very much, everybody, for the opportunity to share this initiative that came from Beaumont RCSI Cancer Center and a strategic partnership with a new academic clinical trial research group called MedSIR. So as many of you know, and many of you were invited to, we held an investigator-initiated clinical trials think tank just a couple of weeks ago, early in May, and I'm just going to talk you through the day and what we learned, and maybe open up for active discussion then about where we think an opportunity like this could go and how it could help our ecosystem. So as many of you know, investigator-initiated trials are a lot of the driving force for research in countries. What they do is really they allow investigators to come up with their own clinical trial hypotheses and questions. And like anywhere in the world, they're important for Ireland and globally. They answer questions that commercial clinical trials simply cannot do and will not be represented in the pipeline. So they have an opportunity to really bring questions that come from patients and come from the clinical realm. So these are some examples, starting off the day. Jerry Hanna gave us a beautiful lecture on why IITs matter, both Ireland and globally, to optimize existing care, de-escalation studies focused on safety, to ensure that we understand whether certain agents that we use now commonly really are that affected or benefit in rare or neglected cancers, studies that focus on patient-centered outcomes, and of course translational discoveries. So the global benefit is that they fill those gaps in clinical care that commercial trials do not, and aren't just focused on a commercial endpoint of a drug pipeline. The opportunity for Ireland and what sets Ireland apart is the networks that we have. We heard about POI2 and, of course, the network of Cancer Trials Ireland. We already have this scaffolding that very few countries in Europe and internationally have. Ireland has an established and mature clinical trial infrastructure, engaged investigators, and a system by which we all, as leaders in the different cancer centers, interact and discuss clinical trials. IITs are the lever that turns that infrastructure into original leadership. And this is where we really need to invest, both in current clinical trial groups as well as those that are developing. So we see here that we have 19 centers across the Cancer Trials Ireland network, 137 clinical trials open in the last couple of years, and currently 8% of our accrual has come from investigator-initiated trials. And then, of course, we heard about Lung Health Check today. In the last year, 50% of Cancer Trials Ireland's accrual has come from an investigator-initiated trial. So certainly when we're strategic about what trials we do, we can raise the game. So what is MedSIR and how can they help us? So MedSIR is an academic CRO that came out, it's a spin-out company that came out of a very famous breast cancer oncologist, Javier Cortez, in Barcelona. So Javier Cortez wrote several investigator-initiated trials over the last 20 to 30 years and basically developed his clinical trials unit into a machine for doing investigator-initiated trials, and he developed that into a spin-out company called MedSIR. And essentially what they do is they plug that gap in the development of an academic clinical trial. They assist investigators in the efficient development and focus of their hypothesis, aligning that with a funder. And this is where many investigator-initiated trials fall, is that many of our investigators or teams have excellent ideas, but aligning that with a funder's strategic priorities, allowing it to mature in the correct timeline, and very importantly, for a small country, being able to scale that to other countries that have similar alignment so that we can achieve our goal of a trial above and beyond one country is another place that this often falls. So what MedSIR does is it helps sites to develop their trials and then partners those sites both with a sponsor and with other clinical trial units in their network that they know are reliable and are interested in developing this. So we see some of the numbers. So since 2012, since their establishment, they've led several large-scale investigator-initiated trials, and these are not low quality. These are nature medicine, nature clinical trials. TDXD for brain mets in metastatic breast cancer, using novel therapies for rare lung cancers, thymic tumors, all reaching very high impact podium presentations in major meetings, some leading to investigator-initiated trial-led clinical trials approvals for these drugs. So with this in mind, thankfully MedSIR had approached several of us around a strategic partnership. We signed a strategic memorandum of understanding between the Beaumont RCSI Cancer Center and MedSIR, the goal of which is to develop and fund at least 1 to 2 academic clinical trials per year. But of course, we want to democratize this opportunity beyond one cancer center and certainly see how we can share this opportunity across the country. So this was the agenda that we had on the 5th of May. We had the introductory talk from Jerry about why IITs, why us. MedSIR gave us a lovely talk, Federica Turisi, who's their scientific coordinator, on what some of these partnerships look like and what is really the driving force for a successful partnership. And one of which is to have these brainstorming sessions where the PIs from the different institutions come, they help refine a concept, and it's a grassroots way of bringing that concept forward that has the buy-in of all the relevant stakeholders in a particular area. So how we decided to do this is we solicited for proposals to all the investigators across the country and asked them to give us a proposal or an idea for a clinical trial they had, and then we sort of separated these into those we felt were suitable for a brief proposal, just a one-slide overview, or a full proposal. Myself, Angela, and others selected these really also to align with what MedSIR wants, since they were here, to develop with us into a full proposal. And the full proposals, of course, were those that were of greatest scientific or clinical interest. MedSIR were interested in breast, lung, GU, and GBM. This is obviously where the sponsors are coming to them for trial opportunities. And we structured these as PI presentations with a dynamic discussion with the other PIs in the country as to how to refine that trial concept, what is going to be most meaningful for patients, and many of you in the audience really gave some critical feedback there that I think was very helpful for the PIs in the proposals. So how do I think MedSIR can help us? I think, look, this is the IIT pathway. They can help us to refine our ideas that align with sponsor priorities, increase the likelihood of funding. They can support us in reeling in that funding, in developing the protocols, and then more importantly, they can also help us to deliver by making sure and being realistic that we can open a trial that can then open in other sites around Europe, make it successful, and expand not only our capability, but also our visibility. So these are the submissions of the trial concepts that we received, and I think very happy to show that there is interest across the various different tumor types and also various kinds of clinical trials. So we see here translational studies, very dynamic representation from IROG and the radiation oncology group, supportive care studies, and then of course studies focused on investigational medical product, targeted therapies, and immunotherapy really taking the lead here. So these are some examples of the full proposals that were presented. So the first was presented by Emer Lynch, and of course we want to support our young. She is a new academic clinical trialist that has been supported through UCC, and this is a study that builds on a previous study called the PLAN trial, in which we aim to do liquid biopsy in patients with lung cancer. This is now being proposed in breast cancer, since there are a growing number of genomic targets that might be useful for patients. We thought that this would be a good opportunity for a junior investigator to present her concept and also to focus on a translational intervention. So this is something that is currently in development and being supported by UCC, and this was discussed by Leonie Young. The second proposal, which I know is a little bit biased, this was my PhD student David O'Reilly's proposal called Adapt RAS. As many of you know, we are now in what's called the RAS revolution, that there is an expanding number of targeted therapies for patients with KRAS mutant cancers, pancreatic cancer, GI cancer, and of course lung cancer. And there's an expanding number of KRAS G12C and pan-KRAS inhibitors now in clinical development. This is a key area in which MedSIR is going to have links to sponsors to develop these kinds of studies and where we should be going, since this is where the money will be. So we see here David O'Reilly had a great concept to try to rationalize which patients with RAS mutant lung cancer might benefit from this most by giving them upfront chemoimmunotherapy, and only in patients who have persistent disease identified through circulating tumor DNA, they would then be prioritized for a pan-RAS inhibitor. So we've actually been contacted by MedSIR after this, very interested in this proposal, and it looks like sponsors also interested in this proposal. So I think this is something that hopefully will have legs in the future. We had a very dynamic discussion about melanoma, which I thought was really great for what is actually quite a rare disease. But again, I think clinical leadership is a huge factor here, and we have an excellent young PI, Sarah Loughran in Vincent's, and the new academic chair of clinical trials in Cork, who are both internationally acclaimed melanoma specialists. So we need to be able to leverage this expertise and turn it into a clinical trial that helps our patients. So this is a beautiful study that Sarah developed. One of the major questions in melanoma is around duration of immunotherapy. So we now give upfront treatment or neoadjuvant treatment for melanoma, followed by surgery. And in these patients, they may receive a year of immunotherapy afterwards. And this is based on a phase 2 trial called SWOG S18-101. But actually, the duration of that adjuvant portion, or the optimum duration, is unknown. And in lung cancer, how well the tumor responds to treatment might give us an indication of how long that portion needs to proceed for. So Sarah adapted this idea for melanoma, and I think this is something that would really fit with the melanoma field. It rationalizes the need for immunotherapy. It's very much a pragmatic clinical trial, and this is something that I think, governments and general funders would be very interested in funding. We had a great presentation from our GU group, led by Minu NTO at Beaumont RCSI and discussed by Ray McDermott in Vincent's about using neoadjuvant immunotherapy in locally advanced penile cancers. Beaumont is a national center for surgery for penile cancer and sees a critical mass of patients every year. This is very much a bespoke study that would just be done in a small number of patients, initially 12 and then potentially expanding to 37. And this is another type of trial that you see using an established treatment in a rare or neglected cancer. And of course, it yields a surgical specimen. So of course, there is some beautiful translational work that could be done here with pre and post specimens. And then the last study presented by David Fitzpatrick and the radiation oncology group was looking at glioblastoma, very much an unmet clinical need. We haven't had an investigator-initiated glioblastoma trial I would say in longer than 10 to 15 years. So this is again, a pragmatic clinical trial evaluating hyperfractionated accelerated radiation as an alternative to standard chemotherapy and radiation. I think also a very practical idea, and discussed some of the pros and cons of this. So what are the key learnings and takeaways? I think first of all, what this showed is the ideas are there, that our investigators have the ability to develop very high quality investigator-initiated clinical trial proposals that can be developed in a site but can be scaled nationally. And we now have an opportunity to MedSIR to scale it across Europe and allow it to be more feasible to do. I think it also identified where our strengths are, which is very important. It is easier to build on your strengths than to start below ground in areas where there isn't strength. So I think there are strengths in radiation oncology studies and clinical leadership there, clearly. There is strength in immunotherapy. There are needs in de-escalation studies, and I think importantly, there are a lot of proposals of supportive care. We have substantial expertise in our audience, so our senior clinicians who may not be writing trials now but have a wealth of knowledge. We need to create forums by which that knowledge can enrich those who are writing these proposals. So in real time, we saw a lot of helpful feedback, refining study design and endpoints. Currently, I think our DSSG forums in Cancer Trials Ireland are excellent. However, they serve multiple purposes. Currently, it is a forum to discuss new proposals, but there may be limited time for critical appraisal of new proposals like this. Certainly, I felt that this was a specific forum that was unique, and it might raise the game even more if it was almost a dragon's den to compete for funding. I think you'd see a very high level of proposal come through and might be an active way to engage teams broadly. I think the challenges will be how to prioritize proposals. Clearly, there won't be funding for all these proposals, and there will be difficulty in prioritizing that, but that's something that could be actively discussed. And I think with looking at the proposals out there, we need to make sure that each of our tracks, lung, breast, GI, has the expertise to support these proposals. And with a growing number of supportive care proposals, Do we have that expertise in the DSSGs, or should we think about having a dedicated, supportive care, patient-reported outcome track of its own, so that we can bring that expertise in? Certainly, it appears the interest is there, but developing that ecosystem might be important. So with that, I'd really like to thank Angela Clayton-Lee, Claire Hopkins, Ken Rogan, and the whole CTI organization for organizing this event. I think it was dynamic. It brought us all together. I want to thank Keith Egan, Patrick Morris, and Leonie Young, the leaders of the Beaumont RCSI Cancer Center, for developing and administering the strategic partnership with MedSIR. Certainly, MedSIR is interested in running this as an annual event, and I think it would be wonderful to enrich the CTI ecosystem with that, but of course, welcome everyone's thoughts on format, selection process, alignment, and of course, next steps. Thanks very much.